Well, there it is. Yes, that glorious music heralds the arrival of my Sunday sermon. And I thought this week I would focus on the collateral damage of poor leadership and poor planning. Just cast your mind back to the end of 2019. Boris was elected with a huge majority and everyone was talking about Opportunity Britain. No one, well, maybe Keir Starmer, no one else was talking about Broken Britain. And here we are, 2.5 years later, and it's all about Broken Britain. Because great nations need proper forward planning. And the collateral damage that imposes on a nation, if you become reliant on others, the goodwill of others, for critical items, it's not very smart. The collateral damage of lockdown on the economy, on inflation, just think of the destruction of education of our children. We're going to hear the A-level results this week. We know there was huge grade inflation. Unbelievable. The collateral damage of the impact on people's mental health, children's mental health, children's loss of confidence. All of this stuff that, guess what, they didn't have in Sweden. The collateral damage of having 1 in 8 of our working age population on full out-of-work benefits, including 1.5 million more people than pre-COVID. It's an absolute catastrophe. The collateral damage of actually not protecting the NHS, but devastating it with waiting lists another 2 million, ambulance waiting times so high that some NHS trusts are now basically saying, don't call us, jump in a taxi or drive to A&E. That's how bad it's got in Broken Britain. The madness, the collateral damage of capping the training of doctors' places here in the UK, despite having a fast-growing population, and charging nurses huge fees to get a degree. 30 years ago, they learnt in the wards. The collateral damage of not securing your borders, of having a weak immigration policy, with the risk that criminals will run amok, and billions of our cash is now being wasted every year looking after illegal migrants. The collateral damage of Westminster's net zero, their flawed energy policy, is literally facing us and terrifying us every day of every week. Let's remember, they rejected a nuclear policy. They rejected shale gas. They thought they could rely on others. That might work when the sun's shining, but when it's raining, when things are not going so well, maybe it's not so smart. We're now facing energy rationing and soaring prices. There's no talk of that in the United States. Here we are, sitting on a century worth of our own energy treasure that we all own, and yet we're facing rationing. We can't rely on France or Norway to send us electricity this year. They might need electricity from us and we haven't got enough for ourselves. This is the collateral damage of hopeless, woeful leadership. The collateral damage of letting foreign investors run our utilities. I talked about this September last year. Chinese investors, sovereign wealth funds, overseas investors making huge returns, owning these monopoly utilities like water, like the distribution of electricity. And now we're faced with rationing of water, whilst huge dividends are paid out to these foreign investors. Madness. There's no rationing in a desert called Dubai. They plan ahead. It's not a coincidence there's much cheaper electricity in the US and indeed even in Dubai. The truth is, our useless regulators have been utterly legged over by smart people from the city and elsewhere. So that's my question to you. Should we nationalise perhaps 50% of some of these monopoly utilities so you can get the best of both worlds? You can get the part taxpayer-owned, part private sector run, and part owned, perhaps 50% owned, by British pension funds on behalf of British pensioners. Maybe that would be a good thing. The collateral damage, literally as I speak, they're planning the sale from the National Grid, which is a listed company in the UK, sorry. They're planning the sale of all our gas transmission pipes to none other than the Australian private equity group called Macquarie, that's known in the circles of private equity as the vampire kangaroo. So we're going to sell our national infrastructure on gas pipework to the vampire kangaroo who they literally raped Thames Water for cash and dividends and loaded it with debt. And then, of course, they could do the same here, and then they could sell it to the Chinese, like EDF did with our electricity pipework, selling it to a Chinese billionaire. I'm telling you, folks, pay attention. I am giving you a risk alert. This is a loud risk alert. The collateral damage of selling our critical national infrastructure to overseas investors who will rip us off relentlessly and then flog it to another overseas investor, and it could end up in the hands of the Chinese. That is utter madness. Absolute madness. And don't get us started on the collateral damage of another supposedly public service. Yes, we want to respect our police service, our police force. But if they spend more time focusing on redecorating in multicolours their cars and their helmets and focusing on tweets, maybe it's no surprise that the collateral damage that really affects us is that they stop catching criminals. Indeed, they stop even charging criminals. The charge rate for crimes has collapsed in the last 6 or 7 years by 2/3. It's now about 5 or 6%. In many forces, they haven't caught anybody for burglary or theft for 2 or 3 years. You couldn't make this stuff up. I mean, honestly. And the collateral damage, and I'm going to be talking about this after the break, the collateral damage to our health, to people's life chances of staying alive on sick patients who might be suffering illness, lung disease, heart disease, and cancer. That's what happens if you shut the NHS for everything else except for COVID. Some of us were smeared, we were called killers for talking about this 2 years ago, but now we are seeing the pain and the collateral damage. This is why leadership is so important. This is why this vacuum at the moment that we've got of no leadership whatsoever from this Tory government. There's nothing coming from the Labour Party either. Keir Starmer's completely absent in August, and you're thinking, who's in charge here? And of course, you know what happens in a vacuum. Things run amok. People run amok. And that's literally what is happening now. This is the risk if you don't have strong leadership and proper forward planning. We used to be the envy of the world with our forward planning. But, and whilst all of that collateral damage is significant, the good news, folks, is that we can still do it. If we create growth, we'll create revenues, and we can repair the damage. So yes, on the one hand, the bad news is that Britain is currently broken. It simply isn't working. The good news is that I remain optimistic, that rather like the water pipes, Britain can be fixed. And with that, here endeth my Sunday sermon.